They called her a venefica, a poison woman, not because she murdered, but because she knew when to speak and when to watch, knew what root could soothe a scream or stop a womb. And in ancient Rome, knowledge in the wrong hands, especially female ones, was more feared than war. Before fire claimed her name and silence scrubbed her from the scrolls, Aelia had healed dozens. But all it took was one dying child, one frightened senator, and one whisper sorcery to turn the healer into a monster. The night the fever took the senator's boy, the sky hung low and red, and the dogs wouldn't stop howling. Mothers locked their doors with salt. The alleys of Subura fell quiet, save for the whispers, soft, sharp, sliding from shadow to shadow. They said the boy had convulsed, spat blood, cried for his mother in a voice not his own. And when no offering at the temple worked, when no priest's chant soothed the spasms, the senator remembered the woman with the eyes like storm glass, the one who lived near the tanners, who made herbs smoke and said things like, "Wait until the moon is dark." Her name was Aelia, and she had touched the boy's forehead 2 days before. That was enough. By dawn, men in short red cloaks had come to her door. She was not screaming when they took her, only quiet, one hand still stained from grinding valerian root. A neighbor woman tried to protest, said Aelia had cured her infant of colic. A soldier backhanded her and spat, then she cursed another. Aelia was dragged past the market, barefoot. Children watched her pass, too young to understand fear without form. An old man muttered, "Venefica," under his breath, crossing himself in the name of the lares. They brought her to the forum like a criminal, though no crime had been proven, only suspected. That, in Rome, was enough. She was not put in a cell, but held beneath the basilica in a room that smelled of mildew and hot metal. No one offered her water, no one spoke her name. Later, they would say she was the first of 6, that her capture was the spark. But in that moment, Aelia only stared at the iron hooks bolted to the wall and realized what Rome feared was never the gods, never even death, but a woman who knew how to survive without them. Before she was a name to curse or a body to burn, Aelia was simply a girl who asked too many questions. Her mother sold figs in the forum and warned her to smile small, walk soft, and never speak of dreams. But Aelia dreamed in detail, herbs sprouting from the cracks in marble, stars forming letters she could almost read. When her father died, she began following an old Greek healer named Timoessa who lived near the Aventine. The Romans called her mad, said she spoke to shadows. But Aelia saw how the woman's hands never shook, how the dying looked at her like she was the last thread, tying them to life. Timoessa showed her how to grind poppy seeds to soften a scream, how to steep rue leaves for women whose bellies wouldn't stop bleeding. "Rome fears what it cannot tax," the woman said, "and it cannot tax healing." Aelia learned quickly. She spoke little, observed much. By the time she was 17, she could still a newborn's breathless wail and coax milk from a mother's dried breast. But the more she learned, the more her neighbors began to watch her sideways. She refused the advances of men. She buried small birds at crossroads. She marked moons in charcoal on her wall. Her hands smelled of wormwood, her lips of fennel. To Rome, she became strange. To women, she became necessary. They came to her quietly bruised wives, barren daughters, girls with blood that came too early or not at all. Aelia never judged, only listened. And that silence, that patience, became her greatest sin. For in a world where women were meant to bleed, breed, and bow, one who did none and helped others do the same became dangerous. When the fevered boy died and the senator needed someone to blame, it was not hard to trace the line back to Aelia. Knowledge, in a woman, was not seen as wisdom. It was seen as rebellion, and Rome did not forgive rebels. They called it sorcery, they called it poison, but what they truly feared was a woman who had nothing left to fear. They did not call it a trial, not officially, but the hall was filled with men in dark togas, and Aelia stood alone, her hands bound with rough wool rope, ankles bruised from the drag through the city. Her name was read aloud, but she was not asked to speak it. A magistrate looked at her like a spoiled fruit left too long in the sun, then began reciting the charges: poisoning, incantation, illicit sacrifice, consorting with demons, and the withering of a senator's heir. No one asked for evidence. Aelia had no advocate. A scribe scratched down each word with the indifference of someone recording grain taxes. The crowd whispered, but no one wept. This was no court, it was a public rehearsal of her erasure. Aelia said nothing. She stared at the marble floor, which had once known the footsteps of emperors and now waited for her blood. A priest of Mars stepped forward with a pouch of herbs, claiming it was found in her home. The leaves were crushed, dark, unmarked. It could have been medicine, incense, or nothing at all, but to the priest, it was proof. The pouch was tossed on the ground, and the magistrate nodded as if the gods themselves had spoken. Someone in the crowd asked what would be done with her. A man in gold trim answered with a single word, examined. The air changed. Even the guards shifted. Everyone knew what that meant. It was not about truth. It was about making a spectacle of pain. The examination of a venefica was not law, it was ritual. A cleansing, they said, for the good of the city. She would be stripped, prodded, burned, and broken, until the body confessed what the mouth would not. Rome did not need witches to be guilty. It only needed them to be silent. As the guards seized her again, Aelia finally lifted her eyes. She did not scream. She did not plead. She looked directly at the magistrate and whispered, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, "You fear me because I have no God, no husband, and no fear." He flinched. But still he signed the scroll. She was led away, and the hall emptied. Outside, the sun burned high over the Capitoline hill, indifferent to the girl who had once healed children and now waited to be torn open to prove she wasn't cursed. Rome, after all, had no patience for women who wouldn't die quietly. The room smelled of iron and smoke, not the sacred kind burned in temples, but the kind that clung to raw metal left too long in fire. Aelia stood on a cold stone slab, while women she did not know surrounded her, not with comfort, but with purpose. They were slaves, silent and practiced, chosen for their steadiness, not mercy. Their hands did not shake. They untied her robe, cut the laces at her hips, peeled her garments away like fruit skin, and left her naked beneath the torchlight. A priest stood watching from behind a veil, reciting prayers to Vesta, his words dry and slow, as though naming her impurities aloud would make them real. One of the women held a hot bronze rod near her skin. It hissed when it came close. Another woman tilted her face and examined her scalp, lifting strands of hair with the tip of a hooked pin. They searched for marks, signs that the gods had turned from her, or worse, that something else had claimed her, a mole on her hip, a birthmark behind the knee. Each was pointed to with flat eyes, then scorched with iron to cleanse it. The priest nodded after every burn. Aelia bit her lip until blood touched her chin, but she made no sound. In Rome, silence was power, even if it cost you flesh. They opened her mouth, forced fingers between her jaws, scraped at her gums looking for hidden poison. "The tongue is a witch's blade," the priest murmured. "Sometimes it must be dulled." Someone brought shears. She flinched then, and they paused, just for a moment, enough to remember she was still human. The priest waved them off. "Not yet," he said. "If she speaks, let her damn herself." Aelia was left on the slab as the women rewrapped her in coarser cloth, the kind given to convicts and grave servants. Her old clothes, the ones she had sewn with her mother, the ones she had worn to deliver babies and bury stillborns, were burned in a pit beside the temple. No one would touch them. They were tainted, but Rome did not fear demons. It feared disobedience, and what better way to crush it than through holy pain? Before she was returned to the cell, one of the slaves pressed a wet cloth to Aelia's mouth, not out of kindness, but to clean the blood. Aelia stared at her, and for a heartbeat something passed between them. Not pity, recognition. One woman caught in the machine, another ground beneath it. That night, Aelia's sleep was shallow and strange. In her dream, she walked barefoot across a floor of glowing embers, and did not burn. Word spread quickly, not just of Aelia, but of what she represented. In the taverns and temples, over water jugs and butchers' stalls, her name was spoken less as a person and more as a warning. Rome had always feared women who knew too much, but now it turned on those who simply knew, a widow with too many miscarriages, a matron who lived alone and prayed in Greek, a girl who bled too early and never married. One by one, they were whispered about, pointed at, summoned, not always arrested, but questioned, shamed, marked. Better watched than cursed, muttered the magistrates, but watching was never enough. Rome did not just want to silence women, it wanted to sanctify their silence, and the Senate, all male, all cloaked in authority, began to draft a new decree, not a law of justice, but of prevention. It was called the Edictum Uteri Purificandi, the cleansing of the womb. The claim was simple: sorcery could be inherited. A venefica could birth a line of witches. Her womb, then, was not just her own, it was a threat to the future of Rome. The edict demanded that any woman accused, even if not proven guilty, must be rendered barren by sacred rite. They called it mercy, a painless ritual of purification. But there were no records of what the ritual entailed, only rumors, smoke forced into the body, scalding water, long needles blessed by priests of Vulcan. Aelia's name was used in the Senate debate. A senator stood and declared, "We must salt the soil from which poison may grow." Another laughed and said, "A nation cannot stand on cursed wombs." And the vote passed, quietly, swiftly, without dissent. In the alleys of Subura, women began to speak in code. They no longer asked for herbs by name, but by color or shape. Midwives refused to treat strangers. Girls pretended to be dim, dull, obedient, anything to be forgettable, because in Rome, survival meant invisibility. But not all women bowed. A few gathered in cellars. They stitched warning symbols into their robes, buried talismans near temples, kept black seeds hidden in their teeth. They could not stop the law, but they could remember who wrote it. Aelia remained in her cell, unaware of the edict bearing her shadow, but she felt the shift in the air. Less like judgment, more like pruning, a quiet, methodical cutting of roots. She was no longer on trial alone. Every woman with a womb had been summoned beside her. They came for her at dusk. No trial, no scroll. Just 2 guards with torches and the hollow voice of a priest announcing that she was to be ritually cleansed for the peace of the Republic. The streets were empty, as if Rome itself had turned its face away. Aelia was marched barefoot past the Temple of Vesta, where flames had burned for centuries to protect the city's soul, flames tended only by virgins, girls sworn to purity and silence. But beneath that temple, past the sacred hearth and into a hidden passage cut deep into the earth, there were fires no god would claim. The chamber they led her to was narrow and windowless, carved of old volcanic stone. It was not a prison, it was a place of unmaking. 6 others waited there, stripped and marked with ash: a widow, a slave girl, 2 midwives, and 2 noblewomen with veils torn from their faces. The room was lit by 3 iron braziers that glowed more red than gold. In one corner, a basin of water steamed, thick with herbs that smelled of vinegar and blood. Aelia said nothing as they brought her in. One of the noble women was weeping silently, her lips pressed to her knuckles. A priestess not of Vesta, but of some older, darker rite, stepped forward with a bowl and a blade. She did not speak. She did not need to. Each woman was made to kneel. They were burned, cut, scraped. Hot oil poured into ears to silence the voices within. Their thighs smeared with a paste that seared the skin and was said to seal the womb against corruption. Aelia watched each movement, each scream swallowed before it rose. When it was her turn, she knelt, but did not bow her head. The blade passed over her shoulders. The ash was smeared across her chest. The priestess reached toward her with a branding rod, a small iron crescent. Before it touched skin, Aelia whispered, "I am already purified. I have never borne a lie." The priestess froze. For a moment even the fire seemed to listen. Then the brand came down, and her body arched against the stone, but still she did not scream. They left the women there overnight, lying on straw soaked with sweat and blood. No food, no water, no prayers, just the hiss of dying coals and the slow drip of oil into the basin. By morning, one of the women was dead. Another had bitten through her tongue. The door opened, and Aelia was dragged back to her cell. She smelled of smoke, but her eyes were clear. Rome had taken her voice, her blood, her name, but not her memory. And memory, in a city built on forgetting, was the most dangerous magic of all. Alia's cell was empty by morning. No records, no remains, just a smear of blood on the stone and the echo of footsteps leading nowhere. When a curious scribe asked where she had gone, he was told to mind his ink and forget what was never written. That same week, the Senate passed a decree so quiet it was not announced aloud, only carved into a bronze tablet and hidden beneath the archives. Lex Silentium, they called it the Silence Law. It forbade the mention, recording, or memorial of any woman condemned for sorcery. Their names were to be struck from family trees, their homes dismantled, their belongings burned, not for justice, for erasure. Rome did not want martyrs. Rome wanted ghosts that no one dared name. Those who spoke of Aelia were fined, then exiled. A young girl caught carving her name into a wall was whipped until her hand broke. The Senate claimed it was for public peace, that fear spread faster than truth, and silence was the only cure. But the people knew. They always knew. Markets that once bustled with midwives and herbalists fell quiet. Women swallowed their questions. Healers packed their tools in cloth and vanished before dusk. The temples replaced their female attendants with boys. The fire of Vesta burned on, but no one believed it protected anything anymore. Beneath all of it, the marble, the prayers, the pageantry, there was a crack, small at first, but growing, because forgetting is not the same as healing. Aelia's memory did not vanish. It multiplied, in the dreams of those who had touched her hands, in the pain of those whose daughters were never born because the herb they needed had vanished with her, in the walls of the room where she had last stood, which grew colder each year no matter how high the sun climbed. Silence, it turned out, was not absence. It was a presence, thick and waiting, and Rome, for all its laws and lictors, could not control what bloomed in the quiet. Somewhere in the hills beyond the city, a child drew a woman in charcoal, eyes like storms, hands red with something more than blood. Her mother burned the paper. But the girl remembered, the name, the story, the scream that never came. Aelia had become what Rome feared most, not a sorceress, but a seed. And silence, like soil, does not ask permission to grow. Centuries later, when the empire was dust and its gods long buried, workers digging beneath Palatine Hill uncovered a room no map recorded. It was narrow, sealed with brick and lime, and inside lay 6 skeletons, all female, all face down, each with an iron nail driven through the jaw. One wore a bronze crescent burned into the collarbone. At first, the archaeologists called it superstition, a burial ritual to keep the dead from speaking. But something was wrong. The bodies had not been buried. They had been hidden. No funerary goods, no coins for passage. Just straw pressed into the stone and black scorch marks on the walls. When a historian traced the site back to temple records, he found a fragment of a name scratched into a secondary tablet ale, and then scored through with such force the wax beneath cracked. He asked questions. His funding was quietly revoked. The chamber was resealed for safety, but before that, someone took a photograph. It spread in whispers through academic circles, then vanished. And still, the questions grew. In a nearby museum, an artifact long mislabeled as a cosmetic tool was re-examined. It was a branding rod, shaped like a crescent moon. The curator changed the label, then, just as quickly, changed it back. What Rome had tried to bury its fear, its cruelty, its rituals dressed in law had survived not in scrolls, but in the bodies it tried to erase. Women with no names, no graves, only scars etched in bone. The silence law had failed, because silence does not erase. It waits, in dream, in blood, in daughters who trace their palms and wonder what their grandmothers were forced to forget. Somewhere, a girl still draws a face she's never seen. Somewhere, a woman whispers to a flower before swallowing it whole. And somewhere, a name burns at the edge of memory, refusing to be buried. Not a goddess, not a demon, just a woman who healed and was punished for it. They called her a witch, but what they feared was far older than magic. It was resistance. If this story unsettled you, it should, because what happened to Aelia wasn't myth or legend, but a real system of control designed to punish knowledge, silence women, and erase the memory of resistance. Subscribe to Forgotten Stories Ancient World if you want more dark truths from history that were buried on purpose, and comment below with the oldest law still active in your country, or the one you believe never should have existed.